Good morning, everybody. Well, a brief pause in the Brexit wars as commentators and politicians look ahead to the budget tomorrow, where we're told there'll be an end to so-called austerity. Elections taking place today in Brazil, which is about to move, I think, quite sharply to the right, and also elections taking place in Hesse. And that's going to be interesting because I think Angela Merkel will be further weakened by those elections. So perhaps now is a good time for us to sit back and think more broadly about Brexit on a day when everyone's not trying to knock chunks out of each other. But we'll also, over the course of the next couple of hours, discuss that appalling massacre that took place in a synagogue in Pittsburgh yesterday. My feeling that anti-Semitic crime does appear to be on the increase right across Europe, right across America. We'll talk a bit about that and perhaps why we think that's happening. But I want to talk about Europe. I want to talk about the origins, really, of the European project, how it developed, how it evolved. And joining me to do that is journalist, environmentalist, former MEP, author of a recent book on Brexit, Stanley Johnson. Good morning, Stanley.
Good morning. Lovely to be here.
Good. Now, people know who you are, but what they don't know is that you were, of course, one of the first ever elected MEPs.
I was indeed, 1979. 1979 was the first direct elections to the European Parliament. Those were the days, by the way, when the Conservative Party was gung-ho, full of enthusiasm for Europe, at least insofar as the MEPs who came into Parliament in June 1979. Would you believe it? We had 61 Conservative MEPs.
Yeah.
61 Conservative MPs. I think there were 17 Labour MEPs, but I'm not sure they took their seats right at the beginning. And yes, I would say, on the whole, the vast majority of those believed in the European project. Don't forget, Mr. Heath was the one who got Britain into Europe. Mr. Heath became Prime Minister in June 1970. Britain joined officially 1st January 1973. Heath was not at that stage an anathema. He became an anathema later on. But anyway, we came in, now to be fair, it wasn't just the MEPs who, as it were, had a good campaign. We came in on the back of Mrs. Thatcher's May 1979 campaign.
And she, of course, at the time, and people forget this, but she, of course, at the time was a quite enthusiastic marketeer, was the word used in those days, supporter of the common market.
Yes, she was enthusiastic. I wouldn't say she was absolutely enthusiastic in the sense that she wanted to have us for drinks every week in number 10 Downing Street, but I certainly went twice to number 10 Downing Street and met her. In fact, one day I think I did something that was really useful because she had lost her handbag, and I happened to see that she'd actually parked it behind a potted plant. And she went around saying, "Where's my handbag?" I said, "Madam, I think your handbag is behind the plant." I think the most useful thing I did.
Now, was that the handbag she used at Fontainebleau to get us our rebate back?
Well, that I think was 1984.
It was,
and she certainly handbagged them then, and we, by the way, still got that. Going back to your point, though, just try and imagine an era when at least quite a large number of tourists were pretty enthusiastic about Europe. So that, for me, is what I remember. The kind of great sense of course, it wasn't the first time the European Parliament met, but as you say, it's the first time we'd had direct elections to the European Parliament.
But in those days, the enthusiasm that the Conservative Party had for the European project. I, by the way, was a Conservative Party member.
Come back. Come and join us. Come over to Macedonia.
I was so unenthusiastic about it that I started voting Green in European elections.
Nothing wrong with voting Green.
Because in those days, they were, of course, a very Eurosceptic party. So it's funny how things change. But you were there, and you'd worked at the European Commission, so you were part of, I guess, this new experiment is how it must have felt in a way.
Well, I've got to tell you, there's a book by Christopher Booker called The Great Deception, and in a chapter in there he says, how did the European project arise and become Maastricht and so on and so forth? And he says that he reminds us of something called the Spinelli Club and the Crocodile Club, and I was the only Tory Euro MP who joined that right from the start. So in a way I do feel a bit built in. But coming to Mrs. Thatcher, don't forget, yes, she was, as you say, keen on the market, but the irony is that the thing she pushed most, which of course was the single market, was in a way the thing which also has led to the great trap, because the single market brought in qualified majority voting.
Yeah.
And that is really what has been too much for this country to stomach.
I mean, did you, back in 1979, were you one of those people who saw the European project as post-war cooperation, trade, friendship, or were you a believer that we should head towards a single currency, an enlarged European Union, even a militarised European Union?
No, I definitely was not on those lines. For me, don't forget, I came in as an environmentalist. I'd already had 6 years in the European Commission as head of something rather quaintly named the European Commission's Prevention of Pollution and Nuisances Division. The only nuisance I can remember was a German chap who who worked for me, who refused to come to the office at all. He said, I work at night. Anyway, these were the days for me when I combined two interests, the environmental interest and the European interest. So it was absolutely a natural fit. Just at that moment, I'm talking about January 1973, Britain joined, Ireland joined, Denmark joined. But at the same time, the EU got on with 3 new policies, and 2 of them were really very vital for this country. One was the regional policy, and the other was the environmental policy. I had the good luck to be appointed, as I say, the first head of the pollution thing. So I wasn't so much interested in down the road on the European currency and so on and so forth, the common defence. No, I saw this as a wonderful chance to push things through at the environmental. And that's what we did in the run, by the way, to the referendum. We set up something called Environmentalists for Europe.
I remember. No, I do, absolutely. But I've also spoken to people who, of your vintage, who were there in the 70s, working in the European Commission. And 1 or 2 of them have said to me that we went in there with very high-minded ideals about what this new project could achieve. But they've said to me they now feel quite disenchanted, in a sense, with where we are. I mean, let's just look at it today. We've got Hungary and Poland, where Article 7 of the treaty is being applied and their voting rights are being removed. I understand that may well apply to Romania before very long. We have an Italian government, a new Italian government, with a very clear majority of support across Italy that has put forward a budget that's been rejected by the European Commission. I mean, does a part of you think this project's gone too far?
You raise a good point. It's a very good point. And indeed, I can remember, some time ago saying, it's not an open and shut case. This case of staying in Europe or leaving Europe. There are arguments on both sides, and you, of course, have been strongly arguing for the leave side. I argue strongly for the remain side, but. You're quite right. There's some things out there like moving, more and more to a common currency, moving to a single European government, moving to having single defence ministers, chancellors of the exchequer, one for the whole project. But then I said to myself, look, you've got to go back to metaphors here. Metaphor. For me, Europe's always been a ship steering, across an ocean to a uncertain direction, and I always thought the useful thing was for Britain still to be on board. Now, of course, there's another argument which says no. Britain, the Europe is a train, gathering speed on a fixed rail, and the best thing we can do would bail out. I am, I can see both sides at the moment. Though I look at the Chequers proposal. I mean, if I may say so, Chequers. I'm talking about, the current government proposal. I say this is very odd because we're going to get the worst of both worlds with the Chequers proposal.
I agree with that. I mean, I think to leave the treaty, but to still be wrapped up inside the customs union, unable to take any of the of that could come from Brexit.
So you prefer to stay in than
no,
have Chequers?
I wouldn't.
Why don't you admit that?
No, of course, I don't want to stay in under any circumstances because I think.
So what do you want to have?
Well, I think, look, isn't it, when we move house or we change relationships or whatever it is, we come to a fork in the road, we make a decision, and the best thing to do is to go with that and try and make a success of it. And I fear this Prime Minister is rather caught between the two. I mean, do you understand, by the way, why so many British people look at the behaviour of Barnier, Tusk and Juncker and think these are sort of unelected, rather arrogant bullies?
Yeah, this sounds to me a bit like the popular press.
I'm saying it.
Well, I'm not saying you're not the popular press.
I mean, they look awful? Humiliating a British Prime Minister the way they've done it. Isn't there something about these people? And one of the fundamental flaws, I think, with the European project is that the government of Europe are the unelected Commission, and this is power without accountability.
hold on. I mean, we're going to get into theology here, but the European Commission at the moment is, as I recall, appointed by vote of the European Parliament, or at least the leader of the European Commission is appointed by vote of the European Parliament. I think the others have maybe nominated.
Yeah, we get given a choice of one. I mean, that's how democratic it is.
I have known some really top-level European commissioners, and some of them being British, I can tell you. Leon Britton, Christopher Tugendhat, Roy Jenkins, fine man. Neil Kinnock. I mean, it may sound, these are people who really tried hard. Where we are now, I think, is in a total dilemma. The Irish question has, as it were, got so far up the agenda that we're left, as I say, in this limbo. And I think we need to take a deep breath at this moment and say, are we actually going to go down the route the government has proposed?
All right, well, let's talk about that. We're also going to talk about a new book that Stanley Johnson's got out. In a moment, we'll do that. But for now, you're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it is 10:15. Now, Stanley Johnson, it's your 25th book, I understand. Is that right?
Yes, it is indeed. I mean, you could say 25 too many. I remember when I left school, in heaven's sake, it must have been 1958, my headmaster called me and he said, "Stanley, I've got one piece of advice." He didn't actually said Johnny. He called me Johnny. "I got one piece of advice." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Never write a book. It's unforgivable."
And here you are. So what's this one about? Come on, tell us.
This one, Compromat. Yep. Compromat just come out in paperback. It is a fun book. It's a fun book. It's a satire on Brexit on the one hand and Trump on the other hand. And it all begins with a Russian president who is not unlike Mr. Putin going off to Eastern Siberia with the American presidential candidate who is not unlike Donald Trump and firing a dart at a Siberian tiger. Unfortunately, the dart hits the American presidential candidate in the backside. And history unfolds from there, because there is, of course, a transmitting device firmly lodged in the American presidential candidate's backside, and for all we know, it is still there.
Right, okay. Well, it sounds like fun. I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it.
Wait a minute, I'm going to sign it. Sign it for you to Nigel. To Nigel. All good wishes.
Well, very good. Well, that can't be bad. I've got some Sunday reading.
And I'm very glad you almost admitted that life would be better for Britain if we stayed in than if we went in.
No, I have to say, I think to be trapped inside a customs union is ridiculous. I tell you what I don't understand, and, you know, you've been part of this Conservative Party for a very long time. How is she still there as Prime Minister? Because virtually everybody I speak to, whether they're supporters of your son, Boris, within the party, whichever side they're on, everybody seems to agree in private that she's not really up to the job, and yet she goes to the 1922 committee, the desk lids all bang with approval. I mean, how is she still there?
She's a remarkably able lady. She's a remarkably charming lady. She believes tremendously that it is her duty to deliver Brexit, and she has persuaded herself, though not actually me and some others, that the Brexit which she has now cobbled together is the one which is deliverable, and she's going to go for it. I mean, history may say this was a woman whose determination in the end rivaled that of Mrs. Thatcher.
Now, clearly, March 29th next year, when Article 50 expires, whatever deal we're wrapped up in, if we leave the treaties on that day, we have left the European Union.
And you're going to have to leave the European Parliament.
Yes,
all those
I am
expenses
I am the turkey. I am the turkey that voted for Christmas, and you can imagine how hated I am by the other British MEPs.
They're going to lock you out of your office, Nigel, and they're going to say, "I'm afraid you're going to have to walk home or take a taxi."
I'll be out on the street. There's no question about it. And you're still a Remainer. Do you think that we are going to leave on March the 29th?
I personally don't think we're going to leave on March the 29th, because I think that even if Mrs. May gets a vote through Parliament on her, on what you might call checkers, even if she does that, the moment that vote has been taken, there will be a second vote. The way they're structuring it, the vote in Parliament, as Dominic Raab made clear the other day, there'll first be a vote on the deal, but then there will be an amendable series of resolutions, or just one resolution,
including a second referendum.
I suspect that's what's going to happen, and I think therefore, as long as this vote intervenes, before March the 29th, there will be time. There will be time for the government, in the light of the resolution, which will probably be passed after they voted for the deal, to say, we've actually got to postpone the Article 51 because we've got to take another look.
Do you understand how just furious many, many millions of people will be in this country if an open vote that was given to them and explained by everybody in terms of we will do what, we will enact whatever you decide. I mean, would this not be the greatest democratic betrayal?
I don't see it that way, Nigel.
Well, why not?
I tell you
what else can it be?
Let me just explain. Okay, let's say you get a narrow vote in Parliament in favour of Chequers. Just I'm using Chequers as a shorthand. Let's say you get that. But then let's say you have a vote following the vote of principle, which says, actually, we think let's have a double lock on this, and let's make sure that the people of this country actually agree that Parliament has done the bidding of the nation with this Chequers deal. And, if people take your view, as many no doubt will, then the country will vote overwhelmingly and say, yes, Parliament got it right, bully for Parliament. But it's just possible that they may say, well, actually, we don't think this scheme of staying forever in the EU without actually being in the EU, apparently forever, is the right scheme. Hey-ho, that's what I think.
Well, I have to say, I genuinely believe that there is an underestimate in London of just how angry people in the country are feeling on this. A real detachment between the metropolitan elites and ordinary voters out there, Stanley. That's my point of view, and we'll see where we go. But let's move across to the other side of the Atlantic, and with or without the dart in his backside. President Trump's style as a leader, how do you assess it?
He is a most remarkable man, is he not? I mean, I listened to him last night post the Pittsburgh shooting, which we may come on to, saying, we've got to realise that all this rhetoric only leads to violence. Well, I mean, point the finger at yourself, Mr. President, I say.
Doesn't the rhetoric, though, go both ways? I mean, isn't it? I mean, yes, I know that Trump is absolutely out there in what he says, but isn't it equally true that the left fires some pretty unpleasant language back at him too?
I think that is very, very likely, and whether it's just the left, it may not be. I think it's probably some centre ground as well. I, of course, was pretty cautious about Mr. Trump because I was very much bothered that he was going to pull America out of the Paris Convention on climate change. This, for me, was actually a very, very serious thing, and he is going to do that. And by the way, what he's doing now on oil exploration in the Alaska reserves is another thing. So he's bad news on the environment as far as I can see. It's most bizarre. It looks to me at the moment as though he's playing this for the midterm elections.
Which are in 9 days' time.
9 days' time. And I think he's longing for this caravan of migrants from Honduras actually to get to the American border in time for him to deploy the National Guard. Unfortunately, they're being a bit sluggish. They're pushing their prams and they're about 500 miles away.
I mean, you can disagree with them on the environment, but you look at the US economy and growth that's happening, and maybe in many ways America's standing in the world since he became president. I mean, people do fear and respect this American president. Is he a good president?
Not from my point of view. I mean, I say that, more in sorrow than in anger. I do mind tremendously about the Paris Convention, for example, on climate change. I mind tremendously about the way he's going to demolish the Endangered Species Act in America. I mind tremendously the way he is blocking all kinds of... The EPA, the American Environmental Protection Agency, has been hollowed out. These things do worry me a lot. Worries me also, of course, that he's blocking the appointment of judges in the WTO. And WTO is about to be denuded. Actually, I don't mean denuded, I mean neutered.
You mean neutered, yes. Well, the Russians may help him with that. Yeah. All right, you're not a Trump supporter, but yesterday we saw this horrendous attack take place in that mosque in Pittsburgh. This was not an Islamic extremist. This was a white guy who was shouting out death to Jews. In some ways, surprisingly, because you always think, is this going to be some sort of far right-wing nutcase who says Trump's wonderful? Not a Trump supporter, just a complete rabid anti-Semite prepared to go out and commit mass murder. And we've seen, if you look at France, if you look at Brussels, Belgium, and we have seen a rise of anti-Semitic attacks, of anti-Semitic behaviour. What do you think's going on?
Well, in America, you can't, as it were, separate this one out from gun control. I think gun control is a really, really important issue.
But
still.
Trump's arguing, had people in the mosque had guns, there'd have been less of a problem.
I know he's argued that.
Synagogue, sorry. Yeah.
No, it's so for me, the gun control issue is something. I do wonder whether you'd have that kind of outrage if you'd had more serious. Now, you may say, well, in this country you just have a rise in knife crime, but in the end, it could well be that having a rise in knife crime is the price you pay for very strong controls on guns. Do I see a rise in anti-Semitism in this country? I don't, actually. I really don't. The Labour Party obviously went through a traumatic period recently, but I think they've come out of it. No, I don't get that. I don't get that sense at all. This does seem to me a very tolerant country.
But it is happening in Paris, and it is happening in Brussels.
Know more than that.
Yeah, and it really is. And in fact, we've seen thousands of people Jewish people leave those cities in the last couple of years and go to live in Israel or move elsewhere.
It is possible, I suppose, that you could link this to the demographic changes in those cities which you're talking about. I mean, if you're talking about Strasbourg and Paris and Brussels, even I've obviously spent a lot of time in Brussels, and there are, of course, huge quarters of Brussels where there has been an inflow from North Africa.
Yes, no, I mean, there certainly has. And finally, Stanley, unavoidably, your son, I mean, I'm sure you're proud of all your children, but you have one particular son who's rather well known and is thought to be lining himself up at some point to perhaps go for the Tory party leadership. Has Boris got what it takes to be Prime Minister?
Well, now, this is total news for me, that he's lining himself up.
Well, that's how it looks to everybody.
I think everybody's got it wrong as far as I'm concerned. Boris is on my line, and that is that Chequers is not the right answer to Brexit. Do you see what I mean? I honestly think you've got to take this gentleman at his word. If he was an ambitious, careerist, would he really have step down from being Foreign Secretary? I think he's on the principle here, and you would have done the same. The principle here is the deal which was put before the Cabinet some time ago. I was in July, I think. Just not the right deal, and to that extent, he is fighting for a different deal, and I don't think that you can take any. As far as I know, he's absolutely not fighting for a change of Prime Minister, and certainly not fighting to be one of the candidates.
Right. So it's on the principle of Brexit. That's why he's done this.
That's it. Is it difficult to believe that chap does something for principle?
Well, if you read our tabloid press, you'd think we all do everything from the absolutely worst of motives. Stanley Johnson, thank you very much for coming in this morning and telling us a bit about what Europe was like in the old days.
Good old days.
When it had very high-minded intentions.
Before Farage and co arrived.
Well, I was elected in 99, you see, and perhaps I've done my bit not to be helpful. Stanley, thank you. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 10:30. Well, veteran Europhile Stanley Johnson, as entertaining and charming as ever, but he said something very interesting at the end there. He said that he believes that when Mrs May comes back finally with the deal, and she will come back with the deal, already the Chancellor of the Exchequer is saying his whole budget would have to be ripped up if there wasn't a deal. There's no way this government is going to accept no deal. There will be a deal, probably one that people like me absolutely hate, but there will be a deal. But Stanley believes there'll be an amendment and we're heading towards a second referendum. He also said he does not think we're leaving on March the 29th, as we're scheduled to do under Article 50. When I made the point to him that I think there really would be considerable anger out there in the country if we didn't leave on that day, he didn't really agree with me. So is Stanley Johnson right? Are we, in fact, not going to leave on March the 29th? And are the consequences, as he seems to think, quite insignificant? Joe in Neasden says you're talking a lot of sense, Stanley. So there's a supporter there. I'm going to go to William, a new caller from Muswell Hill. Good morning, William.
Good morning. Hello.
Hello. What did you make of Stanley Johnson's comments at the end there?
I mean, it's fair enough to have his own opinion.
Yep.
His opinion's his opinion. I don't pay too much attention to it, to be honest.
Okay.
I think it's fair enough to give him a voice, and that's fair, but it's not my opinion.
What's your opinion, William?
Well, I don't see there'll be a second referendum. I just don't see that happening. It doesn't really calculate in my head that will happen. And, I hope going forward that it's just going to be a nice, clean break. And I'm actually really positive about the whole situation. I'm 32, and I'm an interpreter. So I've been fortunate enough to live and work in Europe for the past 8 years, and I speak 3 languages. And like you, I love Europe. And I feel that really after Brexit, it's going to be it's going to create more connection with each country of Europe and improve our relationships. Relationships are going to become more harmonious and more fruitful.
Yeah, I've always thought, William, that we were sort of always a bit of a square peg in a round hole, and that somehow being inside the club, we were constantly bumping into each other. And I rather agree with you. I think outside a political union, we'll probably get on very much better.
I believe, I 100% agree with you. I think that the British people are fantastic people. Our country is a very successful country full of hardworking people, and now more than ever, the need for connection, the want for connection is there. I'm not really interested in the politics of the European Union, and I wanted to ask you a question.
Go on.
Because out of all my friends, I was the only one who voted to leave, and many of my friends can't really come up with a reason why they voted to remain. They just sort of say, "Oh well, the government didn't have a plan," blah blah blah. And I wanted to ask you.
And of course, William, it's the status quo. People do often fear change. It seems to me.
Yes.
But your question to me, William.
The beauty is that the change is where the gold is. The idea that we get to go back inside, look inside ourselves, work really hard, improve our own country, retrain our own people, and I feel extremely valued as an interpreter because I speak those other languages, and I'm helping people to communicate and speak English. I love my job, and I just feel that there's a huge amount of opportunity. If we're clever, it's going to be fantastic.
Well, William, above all, on the politics of it, we'll be sovereign. On the economics of it, we can become competitive, and that's what I really desperately want. Thank you, William, for calling. That's what I want, and I worry we're not going to get it being wrapped up in a customs union. Your Facebook messages. Alison says, for me, that chat with Stanley just proves the EU will fall in the future. Kevin, he did admit, Stanley, that it had perhaps gone wrong in some ways. Perhaps it had become a little bit overstretched from the early vision that he had. Kevin says, all Ramonas believe in the European empire. Stanley's just another one of them. Craig says, Stanley changed his mind a while ago and back leave. No, he didn't. He seems to have gone back again. He doesn't know what he's doing. Now, I think what Stanley said was he respected the vote. As so many of them said, they respect the vote, but now they all want a second referendum. That respect, it doesn't seem last all that long. All Ramonas, like Stanley, support big businesses. Well, I'm afraid big business is very important in all of this. It does have the view of most in Brussels. I'm going to Waltham Forest to speak to Harry. Hi, Harry.
Good morning, Nigel.
So, do you think he's right, Stanley, when he says we won't leave at the end of March?
He better be wrong. If we're not out at the end of March 29 next year, I will be very, very, extremely annoyed.
Yeah, I think a lot of us will be extremely annoyed. I tried to put to him, Harry, that his view that we could sort of erase the referendum effectively without there being consequences, he didn't seem to think there would be big consequences, but you clearly do.
Well, unfortunately, he suffers from the usual Remainer complaint, which is complacence and arrogance.
Right, and is that...
Can I tell you something?
Go on.
Wherever I go, I'm a very chatty person. I like to talk to people. The wife says I talk too much. But I always ask, if given the opportunity, the one question. I say to them, what do you think of this Brexit business? Now, quite a few are still hard Remainers or leavers. Mm-hmm. A few have left either camp to go the other way. Mm-hmm. But there are very, very many angry people out there.
And what do you think is the source of that anger, Harry?
Well, they can see that ever since we had the referendum 2.5 years ago, we've had nothing but treachery and double-dealing and stabbing in the back. Mm. Mm. And this call for a second vote, this people's vote, if they believe in democracy, why didn't they get behind the result of the first referendum? Well,
Harry, I couldn't agree more. We've had the people's vote. Thank you very much. Tom says, this is what I like about your show. Two people who disagree on things, but can be respectful about it. About time the nation did the same. And Tom, I have, ever since I've been here at LBC, tried to make the point that I will listen to any point of view, debate any point of view, concede good points that the other side make, and we ought to be doing democracy and we ought to be doing debate much more in this manner. And I fear that throughout many of our universities, perhaps even many of our schools, we're not having proper, objective debate on things. It concerns me deeply. Roy is calling from Croydon. Hi, Roy.
Morning, Nigel. 2 points here,
yes.
Nigel. First of all, I think you let Stanley off the hook there, really. What you should have said to him was, if Mrs May doesn't deliver on Brexit, I mean, I've been a lifelong Tory voter, Nigel.
Yeah.
If she doesn't deliver on Brexit, how is she going to expect it to win the next election? You know, I'm expecting her to deliver Brexit, and we leave next March, 29th of March next year.
Well, if we don't leave, Roy, it doesn't really matter who wins the next election that much, does it?
Well, not really, because
that's the point.
If we stay in the EU with stuff, the Corbyn gets in with stuff, Nigel, so it doesn't matter either way, really. My second point to you, Nigel.
Yeah.
When is Mrs May going to produce a white paper telling everybody and explaining to everybody what the future plans of the European Union are? I.e., come 2025, Mr Juncker, Mr Verhofstadt, Mr Tusk have made it perfectly clear that the EU army is coming. There'll be one chancellor covering all EU countries. They want to take control of all countries' banks inside the European Union. When is Mrs May going to produce this white paper explaining to everybody?
Here's the odd thing, Roy. Here's the odd thing, Roy. I quote repeatedly, I did it with Andrew Adonis last week, I quote repeatedly from the latest State of the Union speech given by Jean-Claude Juncker about, as you say, increased militarisation, etc. And everybody in this country says, oh, well, it won't really happen. So it's very difficult to get the truth of it. Roy, thank you. Going to quickly squeeze in Brian from Sunderland. Brian, good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel. Nigel, I've said this to a few of my friends. I was just saying to your producer there.
Yep.
I believe in Brexit. I voted to leave. I don't think it's going to happen in March. And the reason I don't think it's going to happen is because of the government we have don't want it to happen. Theresa May will call a general election. Mm-hmm. She will state that she needs the people to really give her that confidence to do it. The Labour Party will win, unfortunately. The Labour Party will win on the grounds that they will promise to hold a second referendum, and the 2 million odd students that weren't eligible to vote, that are now legally old enough to vote, will do. We will stay in the European Union, and it will all be put to bed.
Well, Brian, I hope you're wrong on almost every single point you've made on that phone call. But you may be right. Brian, I just think there'll be huge consequences of us not doing what the referendum told our government to do. Brian, thank you. Liam in Romford's my next caller. Hi, Liam.
Hello, Mr. Farage.
Good morning. So, Stanley Johnson doesn't think we're going to leave and doesn't seem to think it's a problem.
It's beyond the pale. I'm so angry now, it's just ridiculous. If we do not leave on WTO rules now, on May the 29th, I can't see anything other than perhaps civil disobedience happening. It's just... I'm even worried there might be a civil war, because this is... it's immeasurable how angry I am right now.
Yeah,
we had a vote.
Liam, I understand the anger, but isn't it also true that generally, as a people, we're a pretty peaceful lot, aren't we?
I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, look at Magna Carta, the wars with King John, the Peasants' Revolt. We've even got a film coming out now about Peterloo.
Yes, there is a film.
There's a reason we have all these rights, and that's because we fight for them. And now we've had a democratic process called a referendum. They're saying they're respecting it. They're not respecting it at all. How do they expect people to react?
So you genuinely fear, Liam?
Students that are now eligible to vote.
Liam, you genuinely fear?
People that voted?
You genuinely fear serious civil disorder, yeah?
I feel that I can no longer stand idly by, as the saying goes. And if our result is not respected, I feel there's no other way.
Well, I'm not going to encourage in any way violent, unlawful disorder, but I think there'll be certainly peaceful protest, and I might even be part of that myself. You never know. Liam, thank you. Coming up, we'll get the latest from a developing story that is understood that the owner of Leicester City Football Club was inside the helicopter that crashed in a car park outside the ground as it left the stadium last night following Leicester's Premier League game. That in a moment. For now, you're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC and it's 10:46. At 8:30 last night, a dramatic helicopter crash outside Leicester City football ground. A big fireball, understood to be on board, was the Thai billionaire Wiche Siwatanaprabha, the owner and chairman of Leicester City. Let's go to the ground now and speak to LBC's reporter there, Alex Hulse. Alex, good morning.
Good morning. Well, it's a very different atmosphere here at the King Power Stadium compared with, just 2 years ago, which Siwatanaprabha helped the club win the Premier League in 2016.
That's right.
Fans here have been devastated over the reports and fears that the owner may be dead after the crash last night. They've been leaving flowers and tributes outside the ground. They've been telling me he's given the fans and the club everything.
It's the best thing that ever happened. When they took over, it's the best thing that ever happened to this club, and it does everything. Every time you came down here for home games, it was always the same. You see him smile, and that means a lot. That does.
They've brought so much success for the club and invested so much of their own personal money, and they've done a fantastic job for Leicester City. And it's just so tragic. If what we're hearing is true, it's terrible.
It's just sadness. Thoughts go with the family and anybody else that's there. The owners, pilot, whoever else was on that flight.
Well, emergency services were called here, as we know, at around 8:30 p.m. after the helicopter left as normal after a home match. Someone told me just in the last half an hour that she saw it as she was in her garden, and she said it fell like a sack of potatoes out of the sky. Now we know it began spinning out of control just shortly after taking off, downing in a staff car park before bursting into flames. There are only reports at the moment. We're not clear on how many were on board. Reports suggest 5 are feared dead, including Mr. Siwatanaprabha. Photos taken at the match suggest the owner and his daughter, 2 pilots, and 1 other person who's unidentified at this time were on board as the helicopter took off. The government's air accident investigation branch have sent a team here to look into what's happened. They've also said this morning anyone with information should contact Leicestershire Police.
Thank you, Alex, very much indeed. Well, it fell like a stone. Sounds like something really was wrong, badly wrong. Well, let's just have a little think about the legacy here with Leicester City Football Club. I'm going to talk to Rob Harris, global football writer for the Associated Press. Good morning, Rob.
Morning.
It really was a period of extraordinary success, wasn't it, for Siwatanaprabha buying this club in 2010, and it was an astonishing win in 2016, wasn't it, of the Premier League?
Yeah, these are the types of triumphs that we thought might be unattainable in the days of vast spending in terms of the leading clubs and the disparities growing, but they really managed to pull the side together because it wasn't just the fact they won the title, it was the fact that they were only promoted back to the Premier League 2 years earlier. They nearly were relegated in 2015, and then they produced that remarkable surge through the season to actually triumph. And it was the first time since 1978 that a team had won a title for the first time, an English title for the first time in its history, and it really did put Leicester on the map.
And as you say, achieved in an age of huge global money going into the Premier League, which sort of makes it even more remarkable. Is it too early to speculate what the future of Leicester City Football Club is now if, as we understand, the chairman indeed was killed in that crash last night?
Yeah, obviously there's no official word on his condition, but his family members were involved with the club or have been involved with the club, his son as well, so it's not just a single person indeed who is involved with the running. And I think actually when we talk about them as being international owners, they're often quite maligned at times in the Premier League. Manchester United, the Glazers can be quite distant, in fact very distant from their fans. Stan Kroenke as well, quite distant from the Arsenal supporters, but they really recognise or seem to recognise that it was a community club at Leicester. They would do things that meant there was more engagement between the family and the fans in Leicester, particularly as they were winning the title. Things like beer outside the stadium given to them, donuts as well. So I think they really recognise actually that football is more than just a business. There is fans at the heart of it as well, even though they were, as well, very focused back in Thailand, actually, on using the Leicester success as well to harness their King Power duty-free business there.
So, a pretty sad day for British football.
Well, I mean, obviously nothing is confirmed at the moment, but those scenes last night were incredibly distressing and certainly put into sort of sharp focus amidst all the acumen that can often be in the game, just the human touch and the fact that people are behind these football clubs.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob Harris, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And yeah, the helicopter crashed and it went up in flames. And I think my feeling is with helicopter crashes and light aircraft crashes, and of course I was in one once myself, that probably very often I would suspect people do actually survive the impact, but it's the fireball that kills people. So we're awaiting confirmation, suspected up to 5 people killed in that crash. I'm going to take, before the top of the hour, some more calls on what Stanley Johnson said. Stanley Johnson saying that he does not think we will leave the European Union on March the 29th next year. He thinks Parliament will stop it. Is he right? And what are the consequences if he is? James is a new caller from Reading. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Nigel. Pleasure to talk to you. Sorry?
Go on. I mean, what did you make of Stanley's words?
Well, I remember working in finance 8 years ago when we just crashed out of the ECU. We tried to stay in the European exchange rate mechanism and we couldn't.
Yep.
And I remember the economist saying to us, right, everybody, get in your cars, drive home tonight, but you're only allowed to use the gear stick and the pedals. You can't use the steering wheel. And that's how they're managing the European economy. Only monetary policy, no fiscal policy. I don't want to get too technical,
yes,
but it's not surprising that we're having all these problems in Europe at the moment. And I think there's a huge downside risk of staying in the European Union, because if you remember when Greece got into trouble, even though we're not in the euro, we were called upon for something like 800 million or a billion
yes,
as
we
a
were.
contribution. Well,
yes.
You just wait, and if Italy gets into trouble, that's the first point that I wanted to make.
Yep, no, it's a very valid point. It's a very valid point, James. And I thought it was fascinating to see the manner in which Juncker publicly rejected the Italians' budget last week. I mean, it really is heading for a major conflict, isn't it?
Well, yes, and if Italy fails, the scale of debt that Italy has, I mean, something like $2.3 trillion, it dwarfs Greece. And so, the potential for a downside risk there is much bigger. The other point I wanted to make, if you don't... Can I make another point?
Yeah, go on, do, please.
Yeah, I've always been slightly smug as a British person and looked upon places like China and Russia that strictly control the broadcast media with a kind of sense of, well, we're better than that. But I find that the arguments, the political establishment completely dominates the broadcast media. I mean, if you look, you've got The Guardian, you've got The Independent, you've got The Economist, you've got the Financial Times, you've got The Times, you could just go on and on. You've got the BBC, who just broadcast day after day this kind of anti-Brexit diatribe of all the terrible things that are going to happen.
Despite Brexit, they say, James. We've got some good economic data, despite Brexit.
I know, and, if we liberalise trade, cut tariffs, if we set our own tax regime, this is why the European Union, they know that we have to stay in the single market, they know that we have to stay in the customs union, because as long as we stay aligned with them, we can't compete effectively. But the moment that we do, if we liberalise, go to Singapore, go to Switzerland.
Absolutely. James, that's the opportunity, isn't it? Absolutely. Thank you for your call. Right, we're going to move on because I do want to talk about what happened in the United States of America yesterday. At least 11 people have been killed and 6 wounded at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. Is the rise of these anti-Semitic attacks in Europe and the USA now at a crisis point? Why is it happening? Why is there a rise of extremism against the Jewish community? Let me know why you think it's happening on 0345 6060 973, or maybe you think actually it's hate crimes of all kinds that are rising, in which case text to 84850 and tell me, did weapons play a role? Is Trump right? Maybe had the synagogue been guarded? Would that have helped? I don't know. Please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course watch us on Facebook, comment there too. We're live from London next. Over the last couple of years, there has been a rise in reported anti-Semitic attacks in the USA and in France and in the United Kingdom and in Belgium. What happened yesterday in America, I think, is the worst of its kind in terms of attacks, deliberate attacks on the Jewish community. The massacre happened at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Squirrel Hill, an historic Jewish district of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. The man involved was a 46-year-old man called Robert Bowers. Very quickly he was linked to a series of anti-Semitic posts on social media and one or two comments. He said, "I do not vote for Trump. I've never owned a Make America Great Again hat." But he seems to have blamed Jewish groups for encouraging immigration and bringing in invaders that kill our people. So that appears to be what's behind this particular attack. I think it is the worst one that's happened in America, but to help us look at this and to try and understand whether it's right to think that there's a rise of anti-Semitic attacks, I believe there is, and why. Richard Ferrer, editor of Jewish News, is joining me this morning. Richard, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
Am I right in saying this is the worst attack against the Jewish group in America?
It is, and let me just start by saying, to those affected in Pittsburgh, my heart's with them. I spend a lot of time in shuls in my role as editor of a Jewish newspaper, and the thought of one of these places, being terrorised in this way is truly chilling. You're right; it's the worst one in America, attacking the Jewish community. But these outrages, as you mentioned at the top of the hour, they are all too familiar in Europe. There was an attack on a Jewish school in Toulouse where children were killed. There was an attack in the wake of Charlie Hebdo. Your listeners might remember the kosher supermarket attack. 4 were killed there. I could look back in recent years to Brussels, a Jewish museum. In Copenhagen, there was an attack in a synagogue during a bar mitzvah. These things have happened time and again in recent years, mercifully, though, not here in Britain.
But do we hear that here in Britain there are Jewish people having sort of, graffiti scrawled on their front doors, that this sort of thing is, there is a rise of general unpleasantness in this country?
There is. Luckily, it's on property and it's online. It's not on people. There hasn't been a fatal attack on a member of the Jewish community in this country, which is obviously, as I said, a merciful situation that we're in for the very simple reason that on the continent it's a clear and present danger. You've got the rise of Islamists in France and across Europe, the easy flow of weapons coming across the border from the Middle East, and luckily our borders protect the Jewish community just as they do the rest of British society.
You mentioned Islamists and the growth of extremism, and that perhaps is one of the key causes of this rise in anti-Semitism. But if I look to what happened yesterday in Pittsburgh, this guy is called Robert Bowers. He's a white 46-year-old. I don't think he's an Islamist, is he?
He's certainly not. No, in fact, I was just reading up on him. He had a completely unimpeachable criminal record. I think he had a traffic ticket 4 years ago. That was the only time he actually became someone that the police were aware of. He was anti-immigration. He was anti-Donald Trump, which seems a contradiction in terms. So yes, there's absolutely no instance here whatsoever of anything to do with Islamization or anti-Semitism in that area. The Jewish community has a triple threat. It is the target of the far right, it is the target of the far left and Islamism. Whether this character, Robert Bowers, falls into one of those remains to be seen.
Right, so you see 3 key sources here then of the growth of anti-Semitism: the far right, the far left and Islamism.
Yes, absolutely. And we see a spike in anti-Semitism when temperatures rise in the Middle East. In the last Gaza war in 2014 was when we saw the record number of anti-Semitic attacks here in the UK. I think the last 6 months have seen the second highest on record. Some are pointing to the rise in anti-Semitism in the Labour Party as one of the triggers behind that. There are scare stories here in Britain in 2018, but it is a safe place for Jews to live. People are not packing their bags here in the UK.
No, they're not. And Richard, I can tell you that just last week I was in Strasbourg, and quite early in the morning I was walking into the Parliament, and kids in France go to school quite early, much earlier than we do in this country, and I was walking through a district of Strasbourg, and Strasbourg's got the biggest Jewish population of any French city, pro rata. And I was watching Jewish children, I'm talking sort of 4 or 5 years old upwards, going to school, and there they have armed officers supporting them every single day.
And, well, it is the same here in the UK. I mean, you go across, there's about 7 or 8 big Jewish secondary schools in London. Yeah. They are all behind huge fences, barbed wire, CCTV. In France, after the 2015 attacks, I think something like 5,000 armed officers were guarding Jewish locations. Now, of course, if there were armed officers outside every Jewish synagogue, every Jewish community centre, I mean, it would be an appalling situation that we find ourselves in. The government already spends something in the region of £14 million a year guarding Jewish facilities. Quite how much manpower you want to put in front of this problem, I don't know. But I do maintain, Nigel, it is not the problem that we face in Europe here in the UK.
No,
yes,
okay. I completely understand that, and you've made that point very clearly, and actually in some ways quite reassuringly, I think, to people that are listening. Now, just lastly, Richard, we talk about supporting with fences, and I mentioned the example of children going to school in Strasbourg. President Trump seemed to think that maybe the answer for this, given the rise of anti-Semitism, is that actually, at each of these synagogues, there is somebody there on duty that is armed.
Look, culturally, I've never really got my head around the American fascination and love affair with guns. More guns is the answer. It doesn't seem to be any solution to any problem. Of course, in the short term, if you're going to have a lunatic, a psychopath, armed up to the teeth, intent on killing innocent people on a Saturday Shabbat service, then of course guns could potentially solve the problem. But this is the same man, of course, that said let's arm teachers in American schools because that would stop classroom shootings. So
it's a very different culture. He also called for the more widespread use of the death penalty for people that behave in this way. Richard, thank you very much for joining us this morning. That was Richard Farage talking about the rise of anti-Semitism, talking about some of the appalling things that have taken place in France and indeed in Belgium, and saying whilst the situation is not great in this country, he certainly wasn't suggesting that we're anything like as bad, perhaps, as the rest of Europe when it comes to anti-Semitic attacks. Nicole is a new caller from Boreham Wood. Good morning, Nicole.
Hi, Nigel. This is the first time I've spoken to you.
Well,
I have called LBC before.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on. So it does appear, all the figures suggest there is a rise in anti-Semitic attacks, and Richard Farage there was saying that it comes from extreme Islamism, it comes from the far right and the far left. What on earth can we do about it, Nicole?
Well, I don't know. Look, I'm third generation born in this country. My grandparents were born here, apart from one grandparent. The whole of my father's family, so from his grandparents onwards, and aunties and uncles that weren't from this country, they were all murdered in Treblinka, in the Holocaust. So it's, anti-Semitism is very near to all Jewish people's hearts because one way or another, we've all suffered in history. But I've been saying for the last 5 to 7 years that it's been getting worse here. I've felt it. You can see it in new media, on Facebook, even on a site, British Politics, and those horrific things. I've had to take myself off it because it's upset me so much. What I don't understand is, where are the English people? Why are they not supporting us? Why are not the British people coming out and saying, Jewish people have been an inherent part of this country since William the Conqueror?
Nicole, I think a lot of people are, aren't they?
Well, some are, but not enough. And I feel that Corbyn has legitimised anti-Semitism. Let me tell you, Nigel, that a few weeks ago, it just came to the top of my head. I couldn't stand it any longer. I spent 5 hours crying one night when all this thing was going on with Corbyn the whole time. I just thought, I just don't get it. I don't get it. We're not any trouble in this country. We pay our taxes. We really contribute to the UK. So why aren't people? Some people are standing up for us, but not a lot of people.
Well,
and I want to feel that.
A lot of it, Nicole. I think a lot of it does come down to perceptions over Israel versus Palestine. And you might have seen at the Labour Party conference that on one of the afternoons there, they were all waving Palestinian flags, and Jeremy Corbyn has been a really vehement critic of Israel and the way in which it behaves. So some of it, I think, does stem from perceptions over that conflict, don't you?
But no, Nigel, because yes, I do agree it does, but they use it as an excuse. They use anti-Zionism as an umbrella for anti-Semitism, because at the end of the day, have you been to Israel, Nigel?
No, I haven't.
Okay, please go, because, Majid has been, and he will tell you straight, Israel is a democracy where everybody lives side by side together. It's a load of lies what you hear in the media. And so, yes, when the war in 2014, but Israel had no choice, but it has over 1,000 missiles fired at its people. It had to go into Gaza. But of course, then everybody, you know...
Yeah, I don't want to get, Nicole, I don't want to get deep into that conflict itself, because what I really want to talk about today is what we can do about this growing problem. And what you're saying to me is that you don't think enough British people are standing up and saying that Jews have been part of our society for decades, and we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. That's really your point, Nicole, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and I would like to hear more of that.
Okay, no, you've made it. You've made the point very clearly. Thank you. Well, Nicole feels not enough of us are standing up for the Jewish community. It's a very interesting point of view. More of this in a moment, but for now you're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it is 11:15. The worst mass Jewish killing in the history of the USA is not a completely isolated incident. We have seen similar type of things happening in France, in Belgium, mercifully not in this country. The things here are far from perfect, as Rory points out on Facebook and says, in Gateshead, the Jewish community has private security in and around schools. That's how threatened they feel. And we were talking there about parts of North London where very similar things are going on. Certainly, a Jewish couple that I'm friendly with that live in Brussels have said to me, we're lucky. You know, we're comfortably off. We live in a gated community. We've got 24-hour security. We're staying in Brussels, but friends of ours that are not as well off and can't afford to protect themselves in that way are leaving the city. And thousands of Jewish people have left Paris and Brussels over the course of the last few years. Why is this happening? Is it just anti-Semitic violence that's grown, or actually has racial violence of all kinds increased over the last few years, and what can we do about it? Omar is a new caller from Southwark. Good morning, Omar.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Farage. I believe it was Isaac Newton who stated that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Unfortunately, Jewish people across the world are paying a price for the evil that are being perpetrated by the Jewish state on Muslims in Palestine. On the 25th of February 1994 in Hebron, a chap by the name of Baruch Goldstein, an American Zionist Jew, emigrated to Israel, and on that day he killed 40 people, 40 Muslims, who were praying in the mosque in Hebron tomb of the patriarch, and he injured 150. Okay? There are YouTube clips of Jewish people, Zionist Jews, who actually acclaim that. They were applauding that act. What I'm saying is this: if Muslims are not safe in their own countries, then Jews will not be safe. If you want justice for yourself, you must want justice for others. The
equally,
people in Palestine have been facing atrocities.
Equally,
are facing atrocities as we speak now. They are being
Omar, hang on a second. There are two sides to this, are there not? Because there have been rockets being fired into Israel, all sorts of attacks that have taken place against Jewish people in that part of the world too.
Any attack, so-called attack by the Palestinians, on the state of Israel, pale into insignificance. You cannot in any way compare rockets, which in most cases do no harm, even Israelis accept this, to incendiary bombs and all other forms of bombs and weapons that are being used to kill them on a daily basis.
Are you suggesting, Omar?
Whatsoever.
Are you suggesting, Omar, this is the Israeli state?
Totally unreasonable.
Are you suggesting that it's the Israeli state that is responsible for these actions, or just certain individuals?
Well, you have settlers, don't you? You have unfortunately. Again, the good always suffer for the bad. You have settlers who emigrate from all over the world, particularly in Brooklyn, New York, who go to the state of Israel and deny the indigenous population of their own rights. Is this something that you yourself would, in any way, shape or form, support? Would you like to be a recipient at the end of that kind of behaviour?
No, Omar, I wouldn't. But equally, I wouldn't feel that comfortable if I was a Jewish person living in Israel and I heard Arab leaders from neighbouring countries talking about the complete obliteration of my country. So I'm saying there were some pretty bad things said and done on both sides. But Omar, let me just ask you this. Let's take your contention that Israel behaves badly. And there
is not a contention, this is a fact.
All right, okay. Let us...
contention is a fact. Well, it's been going on since 1948, for God's sake.
If your fact is... just hear me through. If your fact is right, and Israel have behaved badly, and people who've gone to settle in Israel, some of them have behaved appallingly, Is it right that Jewish people living in Pittsburgh or Golders Green or Paris should suffer directly as a result of that?
Pardon me, could you repeat that? So I didn't quite hear you.
The point I'm making is,
yes,
even if Israel has behaved badly, even if some settlers there have committed murder and behaved appallingly,
yes,
is it fair that Jewish communities in Pittsburgh, Golders Green in London and Paris should suffer as a result of what is happening there?
Unfortunately, Palestinians are being killed on a daily basis.
So is it justified, Omar?
Israel. And these people who are being attacked... Hello?
All right. I'm just asking you, Omar, so are you saying then
yes,
that there is in fact some justification for anti-Semitic attacks that happen?
Yes.
Wow.
Because
Omar, how can those people that were praying yesterday in Pittsburgh, on the Jewish Sabbath, how should they as individuals in any way be held responsible for what is happening in Israel?
Before the state of Israel was created, they were not. Jews and Muslims have been living in that part of the world harmoniously for hundreds of years. And all of a sudden, this Zionist, racist apartheid state you call the State of Israel was implanted in the Middle East. And since then, it's been nothing but death and destruction.
So basically, Omar, you are saying that all Jews are guilty, all Jews bear some responsibility.
At all. No.
Well, it sounds like you are.
No. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is this. Unfortunately, when atrocities are committed, the good and the bad will be affected. A bomb could be dropped in London, I'm going about my business, and I'm killed, okay? I wasn't the cause of why somebody dropped that bomb. I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is the reality. This is nature. So in any catastrophe, the good and the bad will be affected.
So basically, Pittsburgh is collateral damage, yeah?
Well, this is what, to coin a Western phrase, yeah. I mean, that's the phrase they use when they bomb people to oblivion.
All right.
Wasn't it Paul Wolfowitz who said they're going to bomb me right back to the Stone Age?
Omar.
And they call it collateral damage.
Omar, we've heard your point. We've heard it very, very clearly. Thank you. Well, I was a little bit shocked by one or two of the things that Omar said there, but I did contend before the last break that this was in fact, when Nicole was on the phone, that it was in fact the conflict that is going on between Israel and Palestine that is at the root of much of this, and that phone call, I think, rather confirmed it. Nigel, I think if we educated children on the atrocities of World War II against the Jews and other minorities, I think people would grow up with a different view of Jewish people, says Mark in Sunderland. Mark, I'm not a massive fan of everything we do in British schools and universities, but I do think one thing that is taught pretty consistently is the Holocaust. So I think we've actually got that ground covered. I support Nicole and all Jews all over the world. Tell me what I can do and consider it done. Johnny in Norfolk has responded, Nicole, very much to your call. You do not know that if each and every one of the people in the synagogue whilst praying had toted a gun with willingness to use it, it's less likely the terrorist would have succeeded in killing 11 people. Trump is right, says someone called Donald. I'm sure it's not Donald himself. Well, there is this argument, isn't there? The reason we have an army is because other people have armies. But I think most of us, culturally, when we hear the American president say that, find it difficult to understand. We find it difficult to understand how more guns could make things safer. But if somebody had been sitting at the back of that synagogue armed yesterday, perhaps a lot of lives could be saved. However, against that, the more guns that are in open circulation, the more people get killed every year. I'm going to Finchley to speak to Mike. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Nigel. Thank you so much for taking my call. I think the message I'd like to give is stop the lies. This is not aimed at you, sorry.
Oh, thank you.
The message to generally in your show is stop the lies about Jews and Israel. Like, for example, this guy, Omar, who rang just before.
Well, it was it really was a very extreme position he was putting, Mike, wasn't it?
Well, let me tell you, how many of your listeners, I want to know or realise that 850,000 Jews are persecuted and kicked out of Arab lands or had to flee for their lives since the 40s. How many of your listeners actually know that?
Yeah.
850,000. It wasn't just the Nazis that persecuted the Jews, okay? Just remember that.
And Mike, and Mike, add to that, how many Christians have fled from many of those countries in the last few years.
We could go on about many other groups that were persecuted. We're now talking about this attack that happened, and I think that the key here is the lies about Israel and about Jews. And, you look at the attacks it's coming from. The far left, people like Corbyn, Emily Thornberry, in a party conference, says she supports any fight against anti-Semitism and so on, and then says in the same breath that she supports the Palestinians and she opposes the racist state of Israel. Well, this is another lie that people like her and Corbyn actually spread out. It's propaganda, it's misinformation, it's lies.
But Mike, even if their contention is right, even if Israel was a racist state, how does that make Jews in Pittsburgh, how should they be held accountable for what the state of Israel does? That's the bit that bothered me with the conversation with Omar.
Logic of extremists, both on the right, on the left, and I don't quite know how to say this, but extremist Islamists. And I'll give an example.
No, you're right.
I'll give an example. Look at the extremist Muslims that have been here in this country. Hamza, Bakri, Anjem Chowdhury. Guess what they all have in common? 100 support for Palestinians, led by Hamas, a terrorist organisation, and their hatred towards Israel.
And we've tolerated them. Mike, I'm going to move on. I'm going to go to Susan, a new caller from Pinner. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning. First time I've called your show. I'm Jewish. I'll get that out of the way. And you have to give me a minute because I'm shaking with rage at Omar.
Well, wasn't it all? It was awful. It was truly awful.
I have now I'm really frightened because I'm concerned about anti-Semitism in this country. My son works for one of the companies that protects the synagogues. He goes out every Saturday with a bulletproof vest. So now I'm even more worried for him. And I would say two things. One, we have had an enormous amount of bombs and offences by the Muslim community against the British community or whoever happened to be in the place at the time. So is all around the world. Does that mean we attack every Muslim in this country? Is that the correlation?
Quite.
These people are just breeding hatred, and it's got to stop. And also, I would say, with regard to the Labour Party, I think all of this is down to Jeremy Corbyn in this country because he has legitimised hating Jews. He correlates it with Israel. And the last point I would like to make, which I find quite astonishing, is there are hundreds of countries in the world which perpetrate the most appalling atrocities on their own people. If you look at Syria, if you look at Yemen, and yet it's always Israel that comes under a target, a country the size of Wales who is desperately trying to survive. It is sent rockets on a daily basis. They have all the schools have underground safety areas. How is this not anti-Semitism? Why Israel? Because it's a Jewish state. Now, everybody liked it when we were all victims and we walk in quietly into the gas chambers. Not anymore. We will fight back.
Susan, thank you very much. And Susan, they're certainly providing some balance to what Omar said earlier. Some very, very strong criticism from several callers of Jeremy Corbyn. And I want to say, if anybody from the Labour Party wants to come back and challenge that perception that is held by quite a lot of people, 0345 6060 973. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It is now 11:30. Well, if Jews living all over the world are responsible for the actions of the Israeli state, then I think we've got a very real problem. I was quite shocked earlier that we had Omar from South London on the phone, basically saying that what happened in Pittsburgh yesterday with that massacre, that those people were collateral damage for, as he saw it, the evil behaviour of Israel and some Israelis. Really very, very disturbing. Lots and lots of messages on this. Omar, no, you can't say that. It's justified. That's just wrong. Oh my God, Omar. And people blame the right for anti-Semitism. What kind of person would justify the killing like that, says Mandy in London. And Miles on Twitter says, wow, Omar on LBC right now saying that the shooting at the synagogue yesterday was justified because of the actions of Israel. This is someone from the UK in 2018. It is. And I think a lot of people are very, very shocked by what he said. Stephen is calling from Manchester. Hi, Stephen.
Hello, good morning.
Did you listen to that conversation I had with Omar?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a student and my family's been living here. My grandmother was born in the UK and I've been living here for my whole life, obviously. I was born there.
Yeah.
I'm a young guy, obviously. I'm 22.
Yeah.
And I'm flabbergasted. But I don't actually know what to say. I'm in absolute shock.
Well, that was real. It was real, genuine hatred, wasn't it?
That was, but that's pure anti-Semitism on live radio. That's not even like on the street. My whole family is subject to. I mean, we've all been subject to anti-Semitism attacks over a number of different ways, and I don't get how he justifies that's what. That's allowed. I understand the criticism of different countries. Like, I'm not going to deny that our criticisms on both sides.
Well, perhaps, Stephen.
How does that allow people to then slaughter people?
But perhaps, Stephen, in one way, it was useful to hear him because it makes because it makes you realise. It makes you realise.
I don't want to live in this country anymore. That makes me not want to live here anymore.
Well,
I cannot. That's someone who's living in this country who thinks it's okay to take my life because of something that's happening halfway around the world. That's okay.
Don't judge the whole country by him, Stephen. Not one bit. Stephen, how concerned are you then? I mean, living in Manchester, how concerned are you about the rise of anti-Semitism?
Very. I mean, we know a couple of...
Omar aside,
yes,
just in general terms, do you think life has changed as a Jewish person over the last few years?
I mean, I'm 22 now. I mean, my first anti-Semitic attack, I remember when I was about 8 or 9, where these two guys who must have been 17, 18, came up to my brother and me, who were doing leaflets at the time in this area, and they were threatening to smash us up. And my brother literally just turned to me and said, "Run. There's nothing else you can do, just run." And so I ran and I left him. I left my older brother, who, by the way, wasn't anywhere near their age, and I just left him. So I think anti-Semitic attacks have been happening for a number of years. But I do feel there's a general unease starting to creep into the community. And like I said, we know survivors who aren't saying it is like pre-war times. They say we get hints of what it was like in Germany or Poland pre-war. We're getting like small glimpses.
And what's the driver, Stephen? What's the driver of this?
A lot of callers have said it, and I believe unfortunately the people we give the biggest platform to are the people that kick their legs the most, and that normally happens to be the people in the media, which happens to be normally small groups of people. So it'll be the extreme right, extreme left, and normally, unfortunately, I have to say, extreme Islamists. But it's not, like you say, it's not everyone, and a lot of people are standing up for us. The problem is that average people who are not going to get into the face of the media because they're not controversial and they don't kick their legs enough. Isn't like one of your callers earlier said, yes, it's true, people do stand up for us, but when you got a leader of Her Majesty's opposition who cannot even stand up to defend Jewish people in the most basic of times, and that's the leader of Her Majesty's opposition, what were we expecting from the average person on the street? I don't know what people should expect.
Stephen, thank you very much for making those points. Again, yet another caller saying that actually when the leader of Her Majesty's opposition allows some pretty unpleasant things to be said within his own party, is it any surprise this problem is becoming more widespread? And I say, once again, if you're a Jeremy Corbyn supporter and you think this is completely wrong, then do call 0345 6060 973. Shelby says, I've never had an issue with the Jewish people in this country. They work hard and contribute. Helena says, Jewish people are friendly, hard-working, and most importantly, they integrate. Scotty says, what causes the problem is a lack of knowledge and understanding of religion. Omar's call still stirring you up. Lots and lots of messages still coming in on that. Paul is calling from Barnet. Paul, good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you.
I, like many others, I think I'm just outraged by the. I'm going to say a couple of things which might be quite difficult for people to hear, but it's not this Omar. It's not the words. It's not the behaviour. He is a nailed-on, intellectually bankrupt racist, and he's living in a society that allows this to go on. It supports it. It fosters it. It festers in our society.
But how do you stop it, Paul?
I tell you what, it pushes normal, liberal, let's say well-educated people to extremes. And I think the Jewish community has been too meek and too mild and allowed these revolting views and people who harbour these views to get on with it. I think it's time to the time is to stand up to this.
Now, Paul,
more vociferous.
Earlier on, Paul, we had Nicole who rang us up, and I'd never spoken to her before, and she felt, fairly or unfairly, but she felt that not enough British people were standing up for the Jewish community. Do you think she had a point?
Well, I don't know what the data is, but it's probably, I see so much more in our news about issues, many other issues, obviously flooded with Brexit. While that's been happening, it seems like the whole of the country's been put on pause, which is bizarre. But all these other issues that crop up, and I'm not minimising it, but the LGB, the press that's going on around that, which is, let's face it, a very small percentage of our society. In the 2016 ONS survey, no more than 2% of people will have identified with that community. And I'm fine, I've got no issues with it at all. But there seems to be a hell of a lot more newsprint and words and media about that than about other disgusting intolerances that this society is allowing.
Paul, you've argued that point very, very well. Thank you for the call. I'm going to Golders Green to speak to Jocelyn, a new caller to this show. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. The first thing that strikes me about any of these calls, which is the most terrifying thing for me, I'm full disclosure, I'm Jewish. Full disclosure, I don't agree with your policies particularly. But what frightens me about any of this is that we go straight to the point of hating each other. And this polarisation of discourse, we go straight to the point of, it's Israel's fault, it's Jeremy Corbyn's fault, I don't support him either. But we don't actually look at the facts. And the fact about this situation specifically is that this guy targeted the Jewish community, A, because he was vehemently anti-Semitic, and two, he hated them because they were trying to help refugees and help immigration into America. And that, for me, as a Jewish person, is the most important thing we can do. I'm very lucky to be fourth generation British. I'm very, very lucky that my family weren't directly affected by what happened in the Second World War. At the same time, I feel like we are deeply responsible to help other people who are persecuted. And we are missing the point of this whole situation. And Omar is missing the point of this entire situation, which is these people are being shot at and killed for trying to help his people and for being Jewish primarily, and secondarily for trying to help his people. And the polarization of this discourse, which is, these people are terrible, they're killing people in Israel, the Palestinians, all of this stuff is absolute rubbish. What these people were trying to do was help people who are being persecuted out of Arab states. And that has been totally missed by every single caller, including the Jewish callers. And, as I said, not a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, and, not a supporter of, certainly not a supporter of what the Baroness Tong was saying. Tong, I think is absolutely disgusting. But everybody's missing the point, which is these people were trying to do the right thing by both Jewish and Arab people, and that's been entirely missed by every single caller I've heard so far on the show.
And that is the point about giving refugee status to those that genuinely qualify for it, yeah?
Absolutely, and I think I genuinely believe, like, as I said, I'm Jewish, I'm fourth generation British. My mother has been out to try and help the refugees in Thessaloniki. I've done work to try and raise funds for various charities who help refugees, because I feel like it's my responsibility as a Jewish person to help other people who have had similar situations to what my ancestors had. At the same time, it is what frightens me most is that everybody goes to the left or the right and to blame all the different people without looking at the facts. And I think that's the most important thing.
There's a lot of polarity, Jocelyn. That is certainly true. Thank you for calling. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 11:45. The worst ever anti-Jewish attack in America takes place in Pennsylvania. I'm asking why anti-Semitism is growing. I'm told by experts from the Jewish community it is growth in the far right, growth in the far left, and growth of extreme Islamism. I have to say, for me, all of this seems to centre around that Palestinian Israeli conflict, but I was really shocked earlier when one caller, Omar, seemed to say that because of the, as he saw it, evil behaviour of Israel and many Israelis, that meant, to some extent, Jewish people around the world were responsible for that. That was shocking. It's led to a massive response from LBC callers. I'll try and get through a few of you if I can. Ben is a new caller from Barnet. Ben, good morning.
Good morning.
Well, you heard what Omar had to say, Ben.
So I did, and to be honest, I'm not actually that surprised.
Really?
It really saddens me how the lives of so many were taken away by the act of one sick individual, followed by anti-Zionist sentiments. You know, these people are arguing whilst families are mourning, people's lives are taken away, and the community is still shaking. And I don't understand why, whenever an attack on the Jewish community happens, people feel the need to justify it with mentioning Israel. Why can't people allow the Jewish community to mourn the loss of lives taken away? It's not about Israel or Palestine or the Israeli government. These were Jews praying in a synagogue, and to even make comparisons, I think, shows how much we fall in a society that we have to justify the killing of Jews to the world. I don't think this will be tolerated in any other religion or culture. And I think that any form of this anti-Semitic rhetoric needs to be completely shut down straight away. And just, we need to stop putting the blame and actually think there are lives lost here. We need to just stop blaming around other countries or policies. And just
but
remember
the trouble is, Ben, as we saw from Omar, there clearly are some, maybe not very many, but there are clearly some people out there that do think that.
I don't think Omar really cares about the Palestinian people. I think Omar has an anti-Semitic agenda, and he's trying to push that, and he's using the conflict as a way.
As a means.
Where does it stop? Should we start blaming attacks on the Muslim community for extremist groups? Should we blame attacks on the Christian community because of their extremist groups? Should we blame...
No, quite. Quite. No, Ben, I get the point. Thank you. Rob on Facebook says everything lately has become us or them. It's all very unhealthy. I get a message here. To Sue in Pinner, for a first-time caller, you had great courage and chose the exact words to sum up the entire sorry state of the anti-Semitic perception of Israel today. Many thanks for your extremely well-thought-out and clear vision on the subject, says Robin. So there we are. First-time callers, don't be scared. If you believe something strongly in your heart, pick up the phone and tell us. Jonathan is a new caller from Watford. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I'm okay. Still a little bit shocked by what Omar said half an hour ago.
Well, I have to be honest, I'm not as shocked as I would have been a few years ago. I won't take much of your time. Ultimately, we need to start working together to stop the problem. It's not us, it's not them. I'm wondering if Omar would agree if somebody walked into a mosque and shot dead 11 people, that it was because Hamas were firing rockets into Israel. Would he accept that was collateral damage?
I did kind of ask him that, Jonathan. He kind of said, well, you can't compare a couple of rockets to what the Israelis are doing. So I don't think he would necessarily have listened to logic. But you said something at the start there that was interesting. You're less shocked than you would have been a few years ago.
Well, because unfortunately we've seen a rise of anti-Semitism and nobody seems prepared to do anything about it. Now, everybody focuses on Corbyn, and yes, there's a lot of problems with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. That doesn't mean that there aren't problems on the right as well. No. Ultimately, everyone should start to pull together and say, okay, this is a big problem, it's getting worse, what are we going to do to stop it? And to be honest, having listened to Donald Trump last night saying that everything would have been okay had there been an armed guard in the synagogue, is that really the kind of country that he wants to live in, where every place of worship needs an armed guard so that people can pray and worship the Lord that they want to worship in peace without the risk of somebody walking in saying all Jews need to die and 11 people get shot dead? That troubles me, Nigel, that... Listen, I'm not a Trump fan, full disclosure. Lots of people aren't. But it troubles me that the President of the United States is excusing not blaming the Jewish community, but saying, okay, if you've got a guard in the synagogue, that wouldn't have happened.
And in fact, Jonathan, to be fair, he's used this argument too about teachers being attacked in school, and there is a big cultural difference both sides of the pond on guns. Jonathan, thanks for your call. Going to try and get through a few more if I can. Sophie is a new caller from Wanstead. Good morning, Sophie.
Hello, Nigel. I have to say I'm really, really very, very angry. Number one, I'm not for any man. I'm not for a Jewish person, a Muslim person. I'm for every man. I'm for humanity. And I think society is so full of hatred at the moment. It's just revolting. And this is not the kind of society I was born into. And we need to look at what we're becoming, number one. And full disclosure, I am a Muslim. Yep. I don't agree with what Omar said. I'm horrified, and he does not represent the majority of Muslims. But what I will say, I'm very, very perplexed. There's been a lot of talk about anti-Semitism, which is wrong, and Muslims. Can I just point out, this man was a white American, and no one
Sophie,
mentioned that.
Sophie, Sophie, I've mentioned it twice so far this morning. I've mentioned it twice, and in fact, when we did, talk to Richard Ferrer earlier about this, he made the point that there are three key reasons for the rise of anti-Semitism. One of those reasons is extreme Islam, but clearly a growth of the far right and far left are part of it too. So, Sophie, I was pretty clear about that.
These people are full of hatred, and they don't care who they harm or hurt. You mentioned a school, and a few years ago, about 140 children, Muslim children, are killed in Peshawar by a Muslim fanatic killing Muslim children. So they're not against white people, they're not against black people, they're not against liberals, they're against everyone. That includes me, who's a British Muslim, and that includes you, who's a white Christian British man.
Sophie, thanks for your call. I don't imagine Jeremy Corbyn is remotely worried about the Labour Jewish vote, as the number of eligible Jews able to vote is tiny. Bearing in mind the Jewish community in the UK is approximately 250,000, says Tanya. Tanya, there is a very small Jewish population in this country. Not that that justifies any of the things that Omar said earlier. It absolutely doesn't. Aaron is my last caller on this subject today. Another new caller from Cricklewood. Good morning, Aaron.
Hi, good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well. Well, I think we all agree there is a growing problem. Do you have any solutions for us?
Look, the reality is, I was saying, like homophobia has always existed and it's always been hidden. Now it's open. Racism is always there. It's never going to change, whatever you do. But I think the key thing that we can try to solve is education for young children and the way the media is being portrayed. That's the reality.
Well, the education, Aaron, I said earlier, quite clearly, quite categorically, that one thing I did feel confident of was that children in schools were taught about the Holocaust. And yet, I get this. My daughter attended a Catholic school in Surrey, and age 14, only herself and one other child in the class knew what the Holocaust was. So there we are. That knocks my theory into a cocked hat. So maybe we're not educating people about this.
Exactly. That is the key. Education. When the child is young and they absorb the knowledge, that's the fundamental idea. But we're not pushing it. If we make it a key thing, then it will maybe solve more issues.
Okay. No, Aaron, I think the point about education is a very, very well-made one. Thank you. Well, we have literally had an avalanche of phone calls and messages since Omar called up earlier, and it is very worrying to hear someone say that because of the actions of a state, everybody of that religion is guilty. And if the boot was on the other foot, and we were talking about blaming everybody of the religion of Islam because of the behaviour of some extremists, that argument would be exactly the same too. Worrying that we have people like that living in London. But we do. I'm back tomorrow. It's budget day. I'll be on air from 6. Coming up this afternoon at 3 o'clock, it's Ian Payne. But up next, it's Kevin Maguire.
Thanks, Nigel. You have a nice day.